Welcome to the On Your Mind podcast, where we believe mental illness can be temporary and transformative. Stay tuned for innovative, effective tools from experts in the field of mental health. Hosted by Timothy J. Hayes, psychologist. This podcast aims to change the narrative around mental illness. Move from a place of fear to a place of hope and solutions. Here on Your Mind.
Jheri South is a certified teen and parent coach, master ADHD instructor, and mom of 7 neurodivergent kids, and a founder of Headspace Hub. Jheri supports individuals with ADHD using practical coaching strategies that work. No therapy, just real results. She also empowers teens, parents, and families to communicate better, build confidence, and overcome habits that hold them back. Creator of ADHD Simplified, Jheri offers one-on-one coaching, online courses, and in-person workshops to help people take control of their lives. Jheri, thank you so much for joining us. It's delightful to see you again.
Happy to be here.
I'm hoping you can get us started by talking a little bit about how you got into the work you're doing and what drives your passion for it.
Well, that's a great question. And there's a lot to it. So I'll try to condense it a little bit by telling you that I am a mother of 7 children, but for quite some time, I was a single mother of 6 children. And during that time, you can imagine it wasn't easy, but I did have a lot of luck in business and entrepreneurship. And so I set out to be a coach. I wanted to work with women. I loved it. It was great. It was all the things. But at the same time, my oldest son was really struggling. And he went everywhere, therapists, counselors, ended up in a behavioral health facility. And I was very worried that we wouldn't reach him. It was a dire situation. And at the same time, many of the women I was working with asked me, will you do a class for teens? And at the time I thought, no way. My oldest son hates me. Teenagers are so hard. I don't want to work with teens. I love working with women on reinvention. But I finally decided to do a pilot program for teens. I think I had about 15 kids in that class. And it was a 4-week program. And it was the first thing that helped my son. And that's immediately when I knew that what I had was powerful, not just for adults, but for children. And then that took me down a road of, as my son was diagnosed and my kids were being diagnosed and I was diagnosed with ADHD in my 40s, it took me down a path of wanting to learn anything and everything I could about neurodivergence to help my own children. So I worked with specialists. I learned everything I could. And it just naturally took me down this path of focusing on neurodivergence in my coaching practice.
All right. And so what did that lead to? You've added neurodivergence to your coaching practice. And did it end up shifting you to work more with teens directly, or are you working more with the parents of teens?
That's a great question. So I was already, once I shifted my niche to teens, I was working with teens a lot. I developed a curriculum in the school system. I was volunteering time doing workshops with kids with higher needs. And then I started doing a lot of parent workshops as well, because this was really interesting. When I would do, for a while, these classes, I don't offer them anymore, but I was doing in-person training with teenagers, and it would be a 3 or 4 week program. But I would always have a parent night where I would ask the parents to come and they would learn some of what I was teaching the kids, and we would talk about the different tools that I was giving these kids. I could always pinpoint, just by the way that the teenagers were showing up in the workshop, which parents wouldn't show up to parent night. And without fail, I could always tell. And I started to understand pretty quickly that if the parents were not involved in the teenagers' healing, treatment, coaching, whatever name you want to give it, then this child was really going to struggle, because you can give them all of the tools and they're doing better and they're saying the right things. And then they go home and the communication hasn't changed, or the shame that they feel hasn't changed. It's going to be very difficult for a child whose prefrontal cortex is still developing to be able to really manage themselves and make some real change. So I learned early on that it's going to be very important that the parents are involved. So then moving forward, if a parent came to me and said, "Here, fix my teenager. They're struggling," versus my child is struggling, I want to get them help, but I want to know what I can do to help. I knew that I was going to have a very different outcome in that, family's treatment plan versus the parent's attitude and whether or not they were willing to say, for as well intended as I am, I'm missing something. Can you help me? Can you help us? That was a very promising situation anytime I had that happen. And so I started to just incorporate that. It wasn't just one-on-one coaching sessions with the teens anymore. It was also the parents' involvement, whether that meant they came to some of the sessions or they did a couple on their own. There was definitely parent involvement. And so still to this day, I'm working with teens and parents of teens, but I do work with just as many adults in this area of neurodivergence. I have a lot of experience working with adults.
Yeah, as you're talking, I remember from decades ago when I worked a lot with teens, kids and teens. I had the thought that my first book, or my next book, I used to say, will be titled, "Quick, Fix My Kid, I've got to go shopping."
Pretty accurate.
Right? Just because I would have that pattern of parents who show up and sit in the waiting room and send the 5 to 15-year-old kid into the office and expect miracles.
Right. Exactly. I'll start now when I'm doing a parenting presentation. My opening slide is, if your child is struggling, start with you. If your child's on drugs, start with you. If your child's being bullied, struggling in school, start with you. And that can be a little bit jarring because parents are coming to learn, how do I fix my child? How do I fix their behavior? They're not expecting to hear, start with you. And it is the place that we want to start.
And so what's the first step when you're starting with the parents, when they might have, or they're even questioning whether they've got a child who's neurodivergent or they're neurodivergent?
That's a great question. So, neurodivergence obviously adds an entirely new level to coaching and what we're experiencing because
Let me pause you there and ask you to offer a definition, kind of a simpler definition to people. What are you meaning when you say neurodivergence?
Oh, that's a great question. Thanks for asking that. So when I'm talking about someone who's neurodivergent, I'm talking about somebody who either falls somewhere on the autism spectrum or somebody that has ADHD or both. So that's the definition that I use. And this is and the reason I will say neurodivergent sometimes, not all the times, instead of autism or ADHD is because a lot of the symptoms will overlap, even though they are different.
Right.
And many times we will see both together. There's a high comorbidity rate with ADHD, for example. And so a lot of times it will fall under, the umbrella of both. But one thing that they have in common is that with the executive functioning deficits, until their brain has finished developing, they're going to be about 3 years behind. And that comes directly from Dr. Berkeley. So, if they're 13 years old, they're actually at an executive function age of 10. If a parent doesn't understand this, then they are going to have thoughts like they should be able to do this. They're old enough to be able to figure this out on their own. I shouldn't be having to remind you. But what if they were 10? Does that change? Yeah. Or so with a parent, for example, who if we're saying, let's start with you, we're looking at how are you interpreting their behavior and what do you not know about neurodivergence, whether it's ADHD or autism or both. What are you misunderstanding? Because, for example, one of the things that's missed so often is autism. It's just missed all the time. So in my office, for a while, I was really just focusing on ADHD, even though 5 of my 7 children are on the spectrum. And kids would come in and their parents would say, they are just so disrespectful. They argue with everything I say. They always have to be right. If I say it's 7:15, they'll say, no, it's 7:17. And so the parent will have a lot to say about how disrespectful this child is. But then you get them in here, I'm talking to them, and they don't really have a defiant personality, but they do have black and white thinking.
Yeah.
And they do get frustrated when their parent is saying something that doesn't make sense. And the biggest issue that I see with teenagers on the spectrum is they feel so misunderstood. And I had one teenage boy, I thought it was hilarious. I think he was a junior in high school. I said, "What's your biggest pet peeve?" Because he was pretty easygoing. And he said, "I don't really have pet peeves except for when my mom spreads misinformation."
Oh, wow.
But his example of that was his mother suggesting the wrong dose of Tylenol to his sister accidentally, and then she fixed it. But these things for him were big deals. It was a big deal to hear information incorrectly. And so he would be one of those people that if you said, "Oh, we got back at 8:00," he would say, "No, it wasn't 8:00. It was 8:07." And for a parent who doesn't, first of all, know that their child's on the spectrum or doesn't understand the communication gap, that looks like disrespect,
Right.
right? So there's such a lack of
Or
understanding.
one-upsmanship.
Exactly. So working on their communication, I think the majority of the time it's a communication problem. And I'm not.
And as you're saying here, you begin with the education, right? You start to educate the parents about what you can learn and what they might learn about what's actually causing these behaviors to come from their child and then integrate into the interaction with them.
That's exactly right. And I have 7 children. Most of my kids are adults now. I've looking back, if I wanted to punish myself, I could say I did almost everything wrong for a while. I didn't understand what I understand now. So I don't ever approach this from a place of shame. I don't blame parents for not understanding what they don't understand. But now let's dive into it and figure out, you could have a parent that says, "I don't get it. I love my kid. I'm always telling them that. I hug them. I give them compliments and they're so upset or they don't like me." And they don't have awareness to what they don't know. So education, like you said, and then really understanding, how can I be communicating differently? And that can be a lot of different things. I will say that we spend a lot of time as parents, most of us, saying things to our kids like, learn how to stay calm. You don't have to yell. Don't say things like that just because you're mad. But then most of the time, most of us, out there, this was me for sure. When we get mad, we do yell, or we might slam a door, or we say something we regret. And so I think it's really important that we learn to manage our own emotions if we're going to teach our children to do the same.
Right? Because we can either be blind to that behavior from ourselves or have it thoroughly rationalized, and our kids are not blind to it and they don't buy the rationalization.
No.
If I can't do it, you can't do it.
And they'll call them out in here in my office. They won't call them out to their face, but they'll call them out in here. And I think this can be really difficult if you are a parent who is just finding out that you have ADHD, for example. Well, most of the time with ADHD, we're struggling with task initiation, staying organized and on top of things. If there's too much going on, we are forgetful, we miss things. And now we're trying to teach
Impulse control, etc.
impulse control, right? But we're trying to teach our child to be organized and not late and stay on top of things. It can be very overwhelming. So, yeah, I think that figuring out how we can put processes in place, because our children, we know this, they're watching what we do more than they're listening to what we say. They're going to be the first ones to call us out for being hypocrites. I mean, I have had my kids call me out. I'm not a yeller. I was in my previous mom life, but if I raise my voice at all, you yell at me. You yell at me. Why can't I yell? I mean, they'll remember that for 10 years. The one time I yelled at them. So it is important that we learn how to manage ourselves and communicate more effectively. And I think the other really important thing that I would highlight is having consistency, being good at having healthy boundaries, rules, and consequences. And I would say most of the time, 90% of the time, the parents that come in here will admit that they are not great at consistency because we're human and we're busy and we have a lot going on. And especially if we're ADHD, because, it's hard to do day in, day out, be consistent no matter what, stay on top of it. So one thing that we'll do is we'll kind of examine the way things are working in the home now. Is there chores, screen time, homework? I am not big about telling people what to do. For example, I don't say, well, this is how much screen time you should give this child, or here's the chores they should be doing. I just offer general information that I think it's really important for kids to do chores, or you decide exactly how you want to implement it in your home. But here's an idea of how this could work. But helping them come up with something that will work in their home that they can be consistent with. Because what I will say is that when we're inconsistent, and I've seen this time and time again, we rob that child of the opportunity to take responsibility for their wrongdoing. So if we have a rule and we're exhausted and the child breaks the rule and we just kind of brush it off because we don't have time to deal with it. And then the next week they break the same rule or even a different rule, and we implement the consequence that we initially said we were going to implement. That child doesn't think, okay, well, that's fair. I broke the rule. They think, well, last week you didn't do anything. How come last week you didn't do anything and this week I did something? And they'll come in here and tell me what a problem their parent is, and they're just trying to punish me, and they don't really care about these rules. They were just in a bad mood. When we're not consistent, we send a confusing message to the child. So
Exactly.
being consistent is very important.
Right. And as you say, I believe your phrase was you rob the child of an opportunity to take responsibility for their behavior.
I really believe that. Yes. Mm-hmm.
So you've mentioned skill building and techniques. Are there some, I don't want you to just open your toolkit and spill it out here for us, but
Sure.
is there one or two of those that you start with that you find people are just shocked by, or that carry tremendous and at least initial benefit when you're working with a family for the first time? Other than what you're saying about, the consistency and the follow through and
Well, and especially if we're talking about neurodivergence, there's a couple of things that I think can be really helpful for your audience here today and any parent that walks through the door. And one of them is just understanding the ADHD brain, and that it is different. There is a different neurological system that we're wired with if we have ADHD, for example. And so you think about like a neurotypical person. If something's in front of them, they're able to force themselves to complete that task, either because it's important, it just needs to get done, or because there's a reward at the end. That does absolutely nothing for the ADHD brain. The ADHD brain is wired to turn on when there is novelty, interest, a challenge or competition, urgency, or passion. We have an acronym for that. It's NICUP, so that we can remember. And I didn't make this up, by the way. This comes
that's all right.
straight from the
So
specialist.
one more time, if you go through that acronym,
Novelty, interest, challenge or competition, urgency, and passion.
Got it.
So not all of those 5 things, but one of those 5 things has to be present every time an ADHDer is getting engaged. If we can get an ADHDer to get engaged and stay engaged, they can do almost anything. They can hyperfocus for hours at a time, and they can work faster than the average person. The problem is getting engaged. So let me give you a quick example of how I see this work against a teenager, for example, with ADHD, and where miscommunication can come in with the parent. Is you will have, for one thing, ADHDers are terrible at self-appraisal. So no teenager is going to be able to answer the question if you say, how come you could do this yesterday, but you can't get it done today? They're going to say, I don't know, because they really don't know. They don't understand why sometimes their brain's ability to hyperfocus, why that's happening, and sometimes it's not. So I see this type of example play out time and time again. But there's a girl who's struggling with math. Big surprise, ADHDers typically really struggle in math. And she's bored to tears. She's not comprehending the information. Her parents have her going to tutoring. She's getting an F in math. And she's just having a hard time finishing her assignments. And then there was some big exam coming up. And if she didn't pass this exam, she was going to fail out of this class and have to retake it again next year. So she did her best to study the night before, and she got a B. And she had been failing everything up to that point. And her parents said, see,
you can do it. Why don't you do this all the time?
You're just being lazy. Yeah, you're just being lazy. You can do it. And that's not what's happening. And we don't want to make that mistake. What really happened was urgency kicked
Right.
in. Her brain was able to hyperfocus in a way it couldn't focus before because it was bored to tears. Boredom, by the way, is one of the most overwhelming, heavy emotions for an ADHDer. It feels like depression. And she got to be on her test. And she said to me, I don't know how I did it. I just did it. And she was grounded after that because now her parents knew you can do it. You just refuse to do your math homework. So if a teenager doesn't understand why this is happening and the parent doesn't understand why this is happening, you can just see the disaster that this is with the teacher and the parent. And most ADHDers really struggle with self-confidence because to have, I think, a high self-esteem, a high self-image, a positive self-image, we have to know that we can show up when it's important, that no one's consistent 100% of the time, but we have to know that consistently people can count on us. If we say we're going to do something, we're going to do it. We can show up. And with ADHD, we don't know. We're like, I hope. I'm going to try. I'm not sure. I tried to do it last week and I couldn't do it, but a month ago I did it. We don't know until we understand our brain why sometimes we're turning on and getting things done and other times we're sitting there in paralysis and we cannot force ourselves to do it.
Well, and my brain is showing me how, in the example that you just gave, without realizing it, the parents punished the very behavior that they wanted to happen.
Exactly.
And that's one of the things that I work with people on decades now. We don't have to teach our parents in general, how to punish kids more effectively. What we really need to do is help parents understand how so often they accidentally or inadvertently reward behaviors that they don't want.
That's absolutely right.
And in
That's
this
right.
case, you showed an example of how they accidentally or inadvertently punished a behavior that they did want.
That's right. And I understand it comes from I'm always careful not to shame a parent for doing what they don't realize that they're doing, but once we know, then we can correct. And
Yeah,
that's
once
why
we shine the light on it, let's acknowledge
Mhm.
what it is.
This is why learning about it is so important. There's I think a lot of parents out there that don't believe ADHD is real or don't think it's a big enough problem that we need to get any kind of treatment for it. But once we really start to understand that there's so much we don't understand, you can see the value. I think getting a child help to understand their brain is just as important for the parent as it is for the child because we're all learning together how to help this child thrive. The average ADHD child has heard over 20,000 corrective messages by the time they're 10 years old. I have never had an ADHD client walk in my office that doesn't struggle, even if they're doing it privately, with their self-confidence because they are used to comparing themselves and figuring out why this thing or that thing is such a struggle for them and not other people. And the second thing, because you asked me for two, the second thing that I focus on a lot when it comes to ADHD specifically is rejection sensitivity dysphoria. And more than half of the clients that walk through my office have never heard of that before. It's associated with ADHD and it falls under that emotional dysregulation umbrella. So most people, when you're talking to them about ADHD, we don't use the term ADD anymore. It all falls under the ADHD umbrella because H can either stand for hyperactivity or hyperarousal. And hyperarousal is lots of thoughts at one time, not being able to sleep, overthinking everything. And so we know that not only is ADHD distractibility, but it can just as much be emotional dysregulation. And actually, it usually is the most impairing symptom for most ADHDers.
The emotional dysregulation.
Yes. This is why we miss girls so often because they're not usually very hyper and they're typically better at masking than males are. And the extreme sensitivity to the idea that we're being criticized or rejected. Nobody likes to feel rejected. But when you have RSD, it's a completely different level that you don't understand unless you have rejection sensitivity dysphoria. ADHDers are such intense feelers. When they're up, they're up. But when they're down, they're down. there's even, because we're doing this so much during the day, up and down, it can create a lot of irritability just on its own because there is so much energy output that comes from being up and down. But we are intense feelers, and RSD is really just being sensitive to the perception of rejection. So it could be constructive feedback or criticism. It could be teasing. It could be the idea that we've let someone down, failure to meet our own expectations or somebody else's. But the point is that when RSD is triggered, it turns into what we call an RSD episode, because the spiral is so intense, the idea that we are being rejected. And that's all we can feel is the rejection. So this is usually when parents choose to lecture, correct behavior, or try to talk it through. What's your problem? Why are you acting like this? They're not identifying that this is an episode triggered by rejection. And this child has no control over their behavior right now. They've never learned how to control it. They don't understand it themselves. And it can be so painful. It can feel like an internal wound. I would describe it when I was in my 20s and I didn't know what it was, that I felt like I was being clawed from the inside out. So, understanding what this is, making sure that the child understands what this is, having awareness, understanding this is a wiring issue. It's not a personality defect. It's a wiring issue, that you're not RSD. This is just a wiring that we want to learn to overcome. Is so incredibly helpful because now the parent can recognize it for what it is, not try to jump in and fix it all in the moment, but actually let this child go be on their own. By the way, someone who has RSD, they are the only ones that can get themselves out of it. It is not helpful for anyone in that moment to try to talk to them and make sense of what happened. They have to go regulate their emotions, and we can have the talk later.
And my mind is asking, or telling me that knowing what RSD is, being able to recognize it, is key, is primary importance. And then having a tool or 2 or 5 that you could apply is a game changer. And now you're saying that the experience is that when someone's triggered to an RSD episode, they have to be the one from the inside that stops the clawing, as you say, from the inside. And I can feel the benefit of being able to identify that pattern and then hand somebody some tools to be able to deal with it, and how that might transform some lives.
Absolutely. And, this, because it's perceived, the reason it really can destroy relationships if it goes untreated. So a lot of times I'll have adults come to me who have impairing RSD. They're having problems in their intimate relationships. They have problems at work, getting along with people because they are so easily triggered. It is that we really, not only do we want to understand what's going to trigger us, we really, I think, want to understand how difficult it can be for other people to be walking on eggshells, because something can happen one day and we're okay with it. And the same thing can happen 2 days later. And now we have been triggered. So
Because it's a completely internal experience. You can't
yes,
understand it from the outside.
that's right. So I'll have, I tell this story a lot because it's a really good example of what it can look like with a younger child in the schools. I had a boy that really struggled with RSD. And by the way, I see the episodes come more often and they last longer when we're going through harder phases of life. Maybe our parents are getting divorced or we're getting bullied at school. I mean, because it's so emotional, right? It's the rejection. But this young man struggled with friends, really never had very many friends. And so he's at this new school. He's doing a summer program. And another boy is taking interest in him, and he is daring him to break the teacher's pencil. And the teacher sees what's happening. She doesn't know much about my client. I think this was a 4th grade. He was at 4th grade at the time. And she warns him, don't break my pencil, put it back. Anyway, he ends up breaking the pencil. And the teacher calls him out in front of the class. I told you not to do that. What were you doing? He loses it. I mean, I'm pretty sure he used some foul language with the teacher. He lost it a little bit. So he's kicked out of the summer program. He was disciplined at home. But when he came in my office, he was crying. And so a lot of these kids, too, they put on a tough outer shell, but really inside they are struggling. And he just said, it was just a pencil. I got in so much trouble over a pencil. And in his mind, that's really all it was.
That's all it is, right?
But he said, if the teacher would have pulled me aside and talked to me, I would have apologized. I would have said, I'm sorry. And I know this is true because he's a sweet kid. At school, he has a reputation for being wild and because he has RSD. But because the teacher called him out, he said she intentionally targeted me and humiliated me in front of everyone. He sensed rejection. It was a threat. So to this teacher's credit, as the school year started, and I also talked to the principal, they really were responsive to this information that they hadn't had before. And she had a great year with him because she just made some small adjustments. She never called him out in public again, and he never behaved that way in class again. That's RSD.
Which is, the second part of it you just said, he never did that again, most likely happened because she made the adjustment and created the space where he could make the internal change. And if she had kept calling him out, they would have escalated to the point where he would have been out of the program.
Well, we just don't know what people are going through.
But it's likely, right? That,
No, I'm agreeing with you.
Keep escalating. Yeah.
No, I'm absolutely agreeing with you. What I was going to say is this teacher, she doesn't know about this, but she also didn't know that this boy had already been kicked out of 2 schools, that he didn't have any friends to speak of, that he had been taking chips and money to the playground to make a friend. And he didn't break that pencil because he wanted to break her pencil. He broke that pencil because the kid sitting next to him. He wanted the
friendship.
Yes, and he called him a chicken for not doing it. Right. And we're, as teachers and adults and parents, we're not thinking about things like that. We are thinking, I told you not to do that. Don't do it. And this is why these kids, not all kids, but a lot of the kids with ADHD and RSD have been silently suffering inside with a lack of friendships. And they are the class clowns and they're really talkative. So a lot of times teachers won't think this is someone who's struggling. But what they don't know is maybe they're too much and they're not getting invited to a birthday party. And so when we can have these private conversations, we benefit from getting to know this child. And sometimes an RSD episode, this is not common, but I have had a couple of clients that tell me the impulsivity, the reaction from the RSD is so extreme that all they see is red and they don't even remember what they said. So everybody experiences it on a different level, but understanding RSD is so important. And I wish we were doing more education. It is one thing I do is I do go into schools and work with administrators and teachers, but there is nothing in Arizona law and most states that require teachers to understand neurodivergence at all. There's no training. And so these teachers are just working with the limited experience and knowledge that they have. ADHD is not really an external disorder. It lives in the mind, and we are not learning about how their brain works, what gets them engaged, how they learn, what RSD is, how to help them regulate themselves. There's just not enough education for ADHD, in my opinion.
Well, I would have to agree. And I want to back up to a point earlier in the conversation where you were talking about reasons people may not either identify their child as neurodivergent or ADHD or get help for them.
Sure.
And I think you mentioned 2. Do you remember what 2 reasons you gave?
Well, some adults don't believe that ADHD is real.
There you go.
I've also noticed that because most people have heard that ADHD runs in families, I also believe, I've seen this in my own family, that if the adult admits ADHD is real, they might have to admit that maybe there's something going on with them, and that's hard for some adults. I also think that there is a tough love approach at times that, well, you're not going to go on medication because medication isn't the only treatment, right? But so you're going to tough it out. I did when I was younger. I went through hard things. You can go through hard things, or there's a misunderstanding that if they just try harder and they focus and they don't add a label to themselves, then they'll be able to beat this. That's another reason. Some parents are worried that if there is a diagnosis, that it will follow them around and it won't.
So you've got this idea of the stigma and these other pieces. The one I wanted to add, which I think you are a kind of a solution to, is that I don't want to admit or look at something that there's no answer for.
Mm-hmm.
I won't know what to do with it. And if you get introduced to a professional like you who has accessed understanding of it and understanding of the tools, now all of a sudden there's a whole panoply of things I can do differently. So it's not so intimidating to acknowledge this and or step into the world of dealing with it. So that's why I would just want to say it's just really good to find professionals like you who are developing through your own life experience and your work with in the coaching that you do, really effective tools that the individual child who's neurodivergent and or the parents can begin to use. And it adds so much hope to the picture.
Yes, right. And absolutely. And I think there's no one that knows more about a disorder than a mom who is desperate to save her child, right? So, one of the reasons that my clients like working with me is that when I decided to do a deep dive into neurodivergence, I started reaching out to the top specialists, one of the very top ADHD doctors in the United States. I took a camera crew to his house, and for 4 hours, I asked him every question my clients had, every question I could think of. We talked about everything from medication to estrogen, to how to parent a child, and to, information that wasn't true. I have lots of this information and research at my fingertips. So documents on RSD and trials that they've done and research. And I've done that with lots of different specialists now, interviewing them in the UK, people who have autism, people who have ADHD, so that I could do everything I could to help heal my family from the things that were holding them back, and help them thrive and become the best version of themselves. Because even though I think most of us know that autism is a spectrum, I think of ADHD that way as well. Even within one family, the symptoms will vary from person to person. So, for example, my ADHD is probably a little bit more on the hyper side. I am constantly on the go. I'm a great entrepreneur. I like to be doing things. And I have other family members that they're the exact opposite of that. And so we can't look at one person and say, okay, that's what it is. Or I don't think I have this because, my child, because they do this thing or that thing. No, it's so many different things. And this is why at least looking into it, if your child is struggling or if you are struggling, just looking into it, because treatment will always, always help us, whether it's medication or no medication. Treatment helps us to live the best lives we can live because there's so much awareness and education and also tools out there to help us do that.
So are there specific books that you use as a resource or you refer to parents or teens to help kind of flush out the education you're giving them about these things?
Well, Dr. William Dodson just put out a book, and I wish I can provide you the website later. So he is the person that I really look up to and respect when it comes to his education on ADHD. He is so wise. And I think that maybe not even well enough known. And he put out a book that is phenomenal. So I think every parent, if they want to know more about ADHD, should be looking at that book. There's other, interesting and fun reads out there. I know there was that ADHD is Awesome that was put out last year, and I've read that, and it's good and it's cute and it's fun. For autism, there's a lot out there, but I do want to put out there that when I'm working with an adult too, but also a teenager that might have autism or thinks they have autism or has been diagnosed, I recommend the book Look Me in the Eyes. And the reason I like that book so much is because it was written by a man who's quite a bit older now, but he had pretty debilitating autism back then. Not a lot was known about autism, and so I can't even say where he was on the spectrum, like level 1 or 2 or 3, probably level 2 or 3. But he wrote a book, and the people who knew him said they would have never, because of what he was like when he was younger, would have never ever imagined that he could write a book. And he talks about his childhood growing up. But what I love that he does is he looks back to conversations that he might have had, maybe somebody asking him a question or something that happened at school, and how off his behavior was to other people. Like he got in trouble for smiling when somebody said something very disturbing, or petting a girl with a stick. But he'll tell you what was going through his mind when he did these things. And then it makes sense, but it made no sense to anybody who was observing. And he made all of this band equipment for KISS. And he just talks about these amazing things
He was a
did.
genius, right? Absolute
He's a
genius.
genius. But
Physics and electronics.
he learned how to adapt to society. And as he did that, things changed. His brain actually, it changed the way that it functioned and processed information and communicated with the world. And he looked back at the work that he had done and he said,
Couldn't comprehend it.
couldn't
Exactly,
do it.
right? He couldn't figure out the equations that he had created that let him do such marvelous things. Yeah, I absolutely love that book. And
Well, and the moral, right? At the end of the story, he said, autism is a gift. And so I love for teenagers to read that because there's such a stigma. Parents will come to me and say, I don't want him to have autism. And I've had a teen say to me recently, what if I have kids that have autism? I said, that would be awesome.
especially with what you're going to be able to learn to help yourself and then grease the skids for them. So their life is going to be so much easier.
There's so many more gifts than there are debilitating symptoms. And so we would really benefit as a society if we could really get on board with more education and understand that the stigma is just that. It's mostly full of mistruths and misinformation that there, and that, so that book, anyone who doesn't know enough about autism, read that book because they can see themselves in that book as they're reading it. And there's such a good message at the end. And we just don't have enough of that. Even most of the books we read are, here's the likelihood. I don't like that. Here's the likelihood of your child being able to have a full-time job. I don't like statistics like that. And I don't agree with most of them. That sends a negative messaging that this child has a lesser chance at being married or being successful than anyone else. And I don't believe that that is true for the majority of people who have ADHD or on the spectrum. In fact,
Right.
in many cases, there's a higher likelihood that they're going to achieve some of those things.
Yeah. Well, I noticed the time, and I'd appreciate it if you just take a breath and get centered and think about everything we've talked about so far and think about is there part of it or a piece of it that you want to go back and highlight or something we haven't even touched on yet that you want to leave us with?
Well, something that I've been talking about lately that I think is really important, and we did touch on this a little bit. Why would a parent not want to have a child get diagnosed or get diagnosed for themselves? A couple of things. I think that my experience has been that parents will get the advice, even from doctors, if this isn't really a problem, or you're not really finding that they're needing this for school purposes, let's just not really worry about this right now. And when it becomes a problem, then we can address it. I don't agree with that advice at all. And I'll tell you why. So I have 7 neurodivergent children. I think I've mentioned that already. But my children, with the exception of my oldest, but my children, my 5 children in the middle, they were so easy. They weren't emptying out cabinets and drawing on walls, and they weren't struggling in school, and they were involved in sports, and they were actually quite talented, and they all had friends. And I thought, this mom gig is pretty easy. People would say, wow, you have 6 kids. And I honestly, I would think, like, it's hard. It just wasn't that hard. I loved it. Being a single mother was hard, but that was not hard. And then they're pretty close in age. They became preteens and teenagers. And oh my goodness, that was hard. It was like I just got smacked in the face. It came at me so quickly. And my experience was that by the time things start to manifest, if there's any struggling in school, you start to recognize how much they're struggling with their self-confidence, which is happening. They're just not telling you.
Right.
By the time the behaviors come, now we have so much work to do to get to a healthy place. Also, the comorbidity rate is so high. If you have ADHD, there's a 60% likelihood you'll have a comorbid condition. There's a 40% likelihood you will have a second comorbid condition. So it is more likely that you would have autism with ADHD than it's not. There's just so much that's being missed. It's hard to find doctors that can properly treat. Dr. Dodson says 93% of psychiatrists do not know how to properly treat ADHD, nationwide. So it's hard to find a good doctor. There's a lot of information to educate yourself with if you choose to medicate, not medicate. If you don't medicate, but we were just going to learn skills and tools. So I really think it's important that we advocate for our children, that we get second opinions. You don't have to tell the school. You can get a diagnosis. And if it's not causing a problem at school, keep it to yourself and just learn how to communicate with your child and give them the tools that they need. My son, the first child that was diagnosed with autism, he's 18 now, but he was diagnosed, I believe, when he was 8 years old. He's a genius. He wasn't struggling in school until he got into 11th grade, and he really struggled with his organizational skills. But up until then, I never told anybody. I just kept it to myself and I had it there if I needed it. And I learned everything I needed to know to help him. So I don't agree with that advice. I think that we want to help our children and do a lot of preventative measures. Kids on the spectrum are typically going to struggle socially and they will never. It's interesting. The son that I just mentioned, who's 8 years old, I had him tested first at the schools, which was a terrible idea. Don't go to the schools to get tested. And I had him tested twice, and both times he tested top in the district for his age. And they reassured me that he had lots of friends. He was playing on the playground. He was doing great
Nothing's
in school.
wrong, right?
Right. And it took him until seventh grade because especially kids on the spectrum, they aren't usually very in touch with how they feel. A large majority of them experience alexithymia. So when they say they don't know what they're thinking, they don't know how they feel, they really mean that. It's hard for them to even communicate effectively about thoughts and feelings. So that's another thing, not really understanding what they're going through. It took him until seventh grade to one day mention to me, and keep in mind, every day after school, I'm asking him, how was school? What did you do? I'm already concerned. So I'm asking him, did you play on the playground? Who are your friends? What did you do? Seventh grade, he tells me one day, did you know that I used to just walk up and down the playground, not talking to anybody? I wanted to play football, but I didn't know how to invite myself. So I just walked up and down and nobody ever talked to me for this amount of time. It broke my heart. But I had asked him every single day and I had asked the teachers and everybody told me, including him, good, fine, have friends, good. He's so popular. So it's just really important that we understand if we are going to look into autism, do some research yourself, understand that someone on the spectrum might tell you every day, fine, good, I don't know. And there's some real struggles there that they don't know how to articulate. And educating ourselves first, and then trusting your gut and getting a second opinion and getting on top of these things. Kids who aren't neurodivergent are just struggling at record numbers. And so neurodivergence just adds an entirely new level to that. I think it's become part of our job now as parents to do a lot more investigating into mental health and what children are really dealing with. And last statistic I'll give is that I think it's only 1 in 10 children will come to us and really tell us what's going on up here in their minds. And even then, it's not usually entirely the truth. So we have to figure a lot of that out for ourselves.
Yeah, and it's worth the effort, right? It's worth the research. It's worth reaching out to people like you.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm thrilled that you were willing to share with us. I'm kind of sad that we're at the end of our time because we could talk about a variety of other topics. Let me ask you, how do you prefer that people connect with you?
Oh, well, thank you for asking that. So I have a website, jherisouth.com. And on that website, I offer a lot of free resources. So I have an ADHD quiz. Most of those questions are derived from an actual evaluation form from some of the top specialists I've worked with. I have a free webinar on RSD. I have an online course on ADHD, which is very affordable and tells you anything and everything that you'd want to know, including how I do my mind management, including the module I use when I go into the schools to work with administrators and teachers. And then I also have a place where you can sign up for a free consult with me and learn more about the services and programs that I offer. So I'm constantly trying to put as much information as I can out there. When I was struggling as a parent, I struggled to help my children to get good information. So even though I do this for a living and I am working with people every day in different capacities, I also try to be the person I was looking for when I was a struggling parent trying to help my children. And it wasn't working. What I was doing wasn't working. I also believe that if you're neurodivergent, seeking out people who really understand neurodivergence and have hopefully even overcome a lot of these things on their own is really important, because there's a different language that we speak when we're talking about neurodivergence.
Wonderful. Well, I greatly appreciate your being willing to take the time to share with us. And I thank you for the work you're doing. It's a blessing.
Thank you.
And I will be going to the website and looking at that, the particular ADHD coaching thing you were talking about. And I hope you stay in touch.
I definitely will. Thank you so much for having me and being willing to have this conversation. I really appreciate it.
It's deeply needed, and I hope you're feeling the gratitude coming from me for your willingness to talk about it, but also for just being there and doing that for your kids and all the others that benefit from this.
Thank you. Yeah, thank you so much. Well, I appreciate all you're doing too. I mean, you're getting the word out on all of these important topics that are so needed in the mental health, field for parents, for other people who are struggling. So thank you.
You're very welcome and deserving. Jheri South is a certified teen and parent coach, master ADHD instructor, and mom of 7 neurodivergent kids, and a founder of Headspace Hub. Jheri supports individuals with ADHD using practical coaching strategies that work. No therapy, just real results. She also empowers teens, parents, and families to communicate better, build confidence, and overcome habits that hold them back. Creator of ADHD Simplified, Jheri offers one-on-one coaching, online courses, and in-person workshops to help people take control of their lives.
You've been listening to the On Your Mind podcast, offered by Journey's Dream, where we support people through mental health challenges to a place of true and lasting well-being. If you love our show, we invite you to visit onyourmindpodcast.org to join the conversation, access the show notes, and discover our helpful resources. Thank you for listening.